All right, so we're going to start in the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, the people are on the verge of entering the promised land. God has come into Egypt with a mighty hand. He has redeemed his people. He has brought them out. He has carried them through the wilderness, providing for their every need. They obviously, the first time they attempt to go into the promised land, they rebel. And so for 40 years, he leads them in the wilderness. And all of that generation, save Joshua and Caleb, have perished, and they're about to go into the promised land successfully under the leadership of Joshua. And the book of Deuteronomy is on the edge of that time when they're coming in, and Moses is giving them their sort of a last word to them, and he's instructing them. He's celebrating and confirming the covenant that God has made with them, and that's sort of the time frame of this. So as they are about to go into the promised land, he does all these things, and one of the things that is established in Deuteronomy is a timeline of expectation of what's going to come in the future. So remember, many of the things that we're going to discuss is in the past for us, but for them it's future. He's telling them how things are going to play out. And as we read the book of Deuteronomy, we don't always realize we're talking about a map for what things that are to come, right? Because God lays this out for them. Moses lays this out for them as an either or. Like, here it is. Here is the law of God. Here is my instruction for you. Here is my calling you to righteousness. You can either obey and be blessed and prosper, or you can disobey and you can perish. And he spells out for them in great detail, here's what's going to happen when you obey me and the ways I'm going to bless you. But then at an even greater length, Deuteronomy spells out for them, if you disobey me and if you worship other gods and if you rebel against me, here is what's going to happen to you. Here is all the judgments I am going to pour upon you, one after the other. And ultimately and importantly, he says it is going to climax in you being spit out of the land. It's talking about the exile from the promised land already in the book of Deuteronomy. And as we read the book of Deuteronomy, there is happening in us a growing awareness that, wait a minute, God is not just telling us here's the possibilities, but he's actually laying out the future for us. So as we read all the curses and all the horrible things that are going to happen in response to sin, they all came to pass as we read the later books of the Old Testament, right? And we start realizing this is the actual plan. And so as we begin to see that, we're going to look at one passage to where it I think is a climactic example of it, so you can see it and not just take my word for it. But read the book of Deuteronomy, and you'll see this really is the plan. The plan is this: they're going to go into the promised land, and they will not successfully obey. And because they will not successfully obey, step 2 is they go into exile. But it doesn't end in exile. Over and over, the book of Deuteronomy repeats this multiple times. Always remember this. You're going to need to understand this whole series. Jews love to tell you the same thing again and again in different ways. That's so often what they're doing in their scriptures. And Deuteronomy over and over gives this 3-part plan, right? It was 5 in the New Testament. There's a 3-part plan here in the Old Testament, right? They live rebelliously in sin and fail. They are exiled. But after the exile, there is a restored kingdom. God brings them back out of exile, and he plants them back in the land, and he renews his love for his people, right? And what we're going to see in Deuteronomy, we're going to be looking in Deuteronomy 29 and 30. All right, so it's towards the end. It's a climactic episode of this. And let's see, here's what we're going to see. right? This is the scheme now for us in the Old Testament, okay? This is the timeline that Deuteronomy is going to hammer into us. And I'm just reading one of the instances of it. But this is the timeline, and I'll explain all that we see here, right? So he's giving them a kingdom, right? He's giving them a kingdom in the Promised Land, this Old Covenant, Old Testament kingdom. And in Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 2, it says this, "And Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, 'You have seen all that the Lord did before your eyes in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, the great trials that your eyes saw, the signs and those great wonders. But to this day the Lord has not given you a heart to understand, or eyes to see, or ears to hear.'" Right? So here's the issue. Moses is spelling out for them. And what Moses is going to say in the book of Deuteronomy is, I know the exile is not just an option, it is your fate. Because you don't have the heart to respond rightly. Right? And so what we see here is that there is a circumcised heart that God is calling them to. And back in Deuteronomy chapter 4, he said, circumcise your heart, right? So that you will obey me. But they can't circumcise their own heart, right? They have a sin nature that the sacrifices that God has given them has not successfully dealt with. And so what's going to happen is they're going to go into this land, they're going to go into this kingdom, and they have faulty, black, sinful hearts, and they are going to fail, and it's going to lead them to exile. All right? So for a little space, let's skip to chapter 29, verse 18, and we'll pick up reading there. And we're going to have to read a big chunk, but I'm assuming if you're wanting to understand the old time perspective, the end times perspective from the Old Testament, you're prepared to be an adult and read big chunks of Scripture and try to follow them. So Deuteronomy chapter 29, starting in verse 18, now here's what I want you to understand. This is in that same passage. We've skipped some for time's sake, but it's in the same passage where Moses said, God has not yet given you the heart to rightfully see what God has done and respond. Right? So in verse 18 he says, "Beware lest there be among you a man or a woman or clan or tribe whose heart is turning away today from the Lord our God to go and serve the gods of those nations. Beware lest there be among you a root bearing poisonous and bitter fruit, one who, when he hears the words of this sworn covenant, blesses himself in his heart, saying, I shall be safe, though I walk in the stubbornness of my heart." So he says, watch out that you become people who you live sinfully and you think it's going to be fine, and it's not going to turn into this. All right? It says, "This will lead to the sweeping away of moist and dry alike. The Lord will not be willing to forgive him, but rather the anger of the Lord and his jealousy will smoke against that man, and the curses written in this book will settle upon him, and the Lord will blot out his name from under heaven. And the Lord will single him out from all the tribes of Israel for calamity in accordance with all the curses of the covenant written in this book of the law," one of which was exile, the final curse. "In the next generation, your children who rise up after you, and the foreigner who comes from a far land will say, when they see the afflictions of that land, and the sickness with which the Lord has made it sick, the whole land burned out with brimstone and salt, nothing sown and nothing growing, where no plant can sprout, an overthrow like that of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and wrath. All the nations will say, why has the Lord done this to this land? What caused the heat of this great anger? Then people will say, it is because they abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their fathers, which he made with them when he brought them out of the land of Egypt, and went and served other gods and worshiped them, gods whom they had not known, and whom he had not allotted to them. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against this land, bringing upon it all the curses written in this book. And the Lord uprooted them from their land in anger, in fury, and great wrath, and cast them into another land, as they are this day. The things belong to the Lord God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the work of this law. All right. So, Deuteronomy 29, Moses says, because of God has not given you a new heart yet, you are headed here. That's what's going to happen. The day's going to come that because of your sin, you're going to be cast out of the land, and even foreigners are going to look back and they say, why did this happen? It says, because they rebelled against God and they broke his covenant. That's the roadmap thus far. Deuteronomy 30 keeps going, and we're going to see the next step in the roadmap. Chapter 30, verse 1. It says, and when all these things come upon you, the things he just said, they're in exile. And when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you. So they're sitting in exile. He says, they come to your mind in verse 2, and return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you today, with all your heart and with all your soul. Then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you, and he will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are in the uttermost parts of heaven, from there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will take you. And the Lord your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, that you may possess it. And he will make you more prosperous and more numerous than your fathers. So what we're going to see, Scripture is going to teach two major events take place right here from this move from exile to restored kingdom. There's two events. He's going to gather the people again from the nations. Right? That's what we just read. This is the roadmap, right? This is their future road. They're right here. All right? They're right here on the timeline. All this is future. And here's what God prophesies is going to happen. They're going to go into exile because of their sin, and then there's going to be a regathering of the people. But it's not just that. There's another event. Look at verse 6 of Deuteronomy 30. And the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, that you may live. Right? So the second event is new hearts. Brothers and sisters, you should already be seeing the coming new covenant in Jesus Christ, where God gives us new hearts and he puts his spirit in us. Right? And we'll get to it, but you should already be seeing how this is setting the stage for Christ to be the fulfillment of these things. Right? And so that is the roadmap for the Old Testament. When they're thinking about end times, this is it. Right? And well, we'll go to we'll wrap that. This video is getting long. We'll wrap that up. But I want you to see that what I showed you in last video, this picture, this scheme, I didn't just pull it out of thin air. That the Bible itself is trying to say this is the layout of the things to come. So here's our starting point that we're going to build on and ultimately see very majestic, climactic end times of the Old Testament passages like Daniel and Ezekiel. This is the starting point that they're building on, right? Because this is what the Bible, the framework that the Bible gives them from the beginning.